Okay, we're at the beginning of Parshas Vayetze. This is on page 310 in the Art School Rashi. This is chapter 28, verse 10. Yeah, so up to verse 11. So Jacob departed from Beersheba and went to Haran. Now, the translation here is quite difficult. I'll read to you what he says, and then we'll have to chew it through. He encountered the place and spent the night there because the sun had set. He took from the stones of the place and put them around his head and lay down in that place. Okay, first of all, your English translator writes he encountered the place. Now, sometimes the art school likes to speak like 17th century Britain, with highfalutin English. But the fact is that in this case, the word that's used in the Torah is an unusual word. The normal word to arrive at a place in Hebrew is lahagia. That's to arrive at a place. Paga, as a word for arriving at a place, could be used that way, but it isn't, it's problematic, as we'll see in Rashi. That's one thing I'm mentioning because it's not something that you could figure out. Now, let's see what you think about the next. He encountered the place and spent the night there because the sun had set. You hear anything odd about that? Anything that's suspicious about that?
He said he spent the night there because the sun had set. You could have just said he decided to spend the night there. Or he stopped there because the sun set.
Seems obvious he spent the night there when the sun set. Why does that to say? You going to spend the night there when the sun's not set?
Yeah.
Okay, that's one thing. But it's obvious. But I think it's even worse than obvious. If you say that he spent the night there because the sun set, how do you picture his trip? How do you picture his travel plans?
He's sleeping every time the sun sets somewhere?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
He's sleeping every time the sun sets somewhere then?
He spent the night there. He slept there because the sun set.
Is it implied that the other times throughout his journey the sun didn't set?
No, I think, doesn't it imply that if the sun had not set, then he wouldn't have slept there? What caused him to sleep there is that the sun set. That means, if the sun had not set, if it had been held in the Shemayim another 2 hours, he'd have kept going another 2 hours. Right? I mean, isn't that the direct implication? But that's true. How do you understand his travel plans? It sounds to me like what's implied is, I'm walking, I'm going until nightfall. And nightfall, I'll sleep wherever I am, wherever I end up, wherever I get to. That's a very incredible way to travel. Usually, they've been living in this area for a lot of years. They know people. They know where the caves are. They know where safe places are. Just walk until the sun, until it gets dark, and then drop down wherever you are. So it either implies that, or it implies that, and this is what Rashi's going to say, that maybe he had another destination, an hour and a half away, and he thought that he had time to make it, but the sun set early and trapped him there. But what I'm pointing out is that you say he slept there because the sun set. You picture him doing something, and then bang, sun sets on him, crash. and he has to stay there. So that implies there were other plans. It's just that this got in the way. It would have been different. We'll see it in Rashi. It would have been different if the Torah had said he traveled, he came to the place, the sun set, and he stayed there. That would just be a sequence of events. Then you wouldn't have. But here it tells you he slept there because the sun set. That's it. That's what caused it to happen. And that implies that if the sun had not set, he wouldn't have slept there, which means he had other plans. All that just because of the way the sentence is structured. Yeah.
But I mean, just to understand, in the Hebrew it says kiva ashemesh.
Mm-hmm.
That the right translation, yes, would be like it's the sunset. That's because kiva is not like the sun went. Like
That's the way it's said in Hebrew. Yeah.
like that's what
Ba means it comes to its place of rest, not coming to you. It's coming to its place of rest. That's typical. That's Rav Tanakh. Mimizrach shemesh ad mavovo. The rising of the sun is called its shining, and its setting is called lavo. That's biblical Hebrew. Now, okay, let's see the Rashi on that. Then I'll take the next thing. So, the beginning of 11. The second, 2 lines from the very bottom of the Rashi on page 310. Vayifka, encountered. This word has the same meaning as, it quotes two verses in the book of Joshua. It encountered Jericho and it encountered Dabesheth. If you look over there in Joshua, you'll see that the subject of the sentence is a boundary. A boundary. The boundary that girds the area goes from this to this to this to this to this, right? Not people, not a ship, not a herd of cows, nothing moving. There's nothing moving. It's an imaginary line that goes from place to. We speak about it that way, right? The line goes. Nothing's going. Nothing in motion. So if you're going to tell me that it means arriving at a place for someone who's actually moving through space from place to place and arriving at this place, and your reference for arriving at a place is going to be these verses, you've got a problem. Because the subject in these verses is a boundary, not something moving through space. Furthermore, as I told you, the normal verb in Hebrew for arriving at a place is lagia, not lifgoa. So that is what motivates Rashi, I think, for the next words that he says. On the next page, 311, our rabbis explain the word vayifka as an expression of prayer. And lifgoa can mean prayer. As he quotes the verse, Al tifgabi, do not beseech me, don't plead with me. So you see, and he says, our rabbis explained, he doesn't say it's an agadah, and he doesn't say the first one was pshat. So it's not like the several places that we saw where he's contrasting pshat with drush. It doesn't call it that. I think the problem here is this. I told you at the very beginning that there are 2 questions that you can distinguish. One question is, what do the words mean? And then the second question is, why were these words chosen to convey this meaning? So Jacob's on a trip, and he definitely arrived somewhere. So definitely here, in terms of the pshat, it means to tell you that he arrived at the place. But you still have to ask, why did the Torah use this word instead of the more normal word, and indeed a word that's ambiguous, that has another meaning? And Rashi's telling you because it means to tell you, pay attention to the other meaning also. And the other meaning is to pray. That's what Rashi says here. Okay, I'm going to skip the rest of that Rashi. Now it says, because the sun is set, like 7 lines down. It should have written, and the sun set, and he spent the night there. That would be a sequence of events, a normal sequence of events. Because the sun had set implies that the sun set for him suddenly, not at its normal time, so that he should spend the night there. In other words, this is not only a cause, but it's a purpose. Sun setting is an astronomical phenomenon, especially when it happens early. Then it's a miracle, right? That means the Kodesh Baruch Hu made it happen because the Kodesh Baruch Hu wanted him to spend the night there. Now, as the first Rashi I didn't quote, it's Har Moriah. It's a very special place, so that's something else. At any rate, now I want to justify something that Rashi is going to say, which you can use this. It says, he took from the stones of the place and he put them around his head and lay down in that place. Now, just skip ahead to verse 18 on page 315. And Jacob arose in the morning and took the stone that he had placed around his head and set it up as a pillar. Do you see any interesting interaction between the two verses? This one says, the one we're dealing with says, he took from the stones of the place and put them, well, you see, the translator here is pretty good. He put the word them in parentheses. Puts it in parentheses means it's not really there in the verse. It's just he wanted you to wanted to explain to you what he thought. The strict Hebrew is he took from the stones of the place and put around his head. Lay down in that place. And over here it says he took the stone he had placed around his head and set up as a pillar. So you hear a problem here?
From stones to just
Stones
stone.
to stone.
Right. From plural to singular. It says from the stones of the place, that's not like there are a lot of them, and that's why your translator put in them in parentheses, and now it's become one, and Rashi is going to explain that many became one, and so forth and so on. You could ask against this. This is not obvious at all. Not obvious that there's a problem here. Look back at 11. Read it carefully and see if you could explain it in a reasonable way so there's no problem here at all. What did he do in 11? He took from the stones of the place and put around his head. He took from the stones of the place and put around his head. How many did he take?
Doesn't indicate, unless he examined it.
You don't know. Doesn't say how many he took. The stones are what he took from. He didn't take all the stones. He took from the stones. Could have taken 16. He could have taken 1. Now just tell me in the later verse, he took 1. You see, because it says there was 1. So why is there a problem here of a contradiction? I think the answer is this. If he really took 1, you wouldn't write that way. You wouldn't write he took from the stones of the place, plural. You would say he took a stone. A stone of the place. You wouldn't mention stones at all. You wouldn't put a plural in at all. It would be a cheaper way to do it. And that's what motivates saying that in this verse it sounds like there's a lot of them, and over there it says 1, and that's why it's a contradiction, and that's why it needs an explanation. Yeah.
So it's a little bit on difference on a few verses ahead. But we say over here first Vayikat Yaakov Mishnato.
I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. We're going step by step. Okay, so now look at Rashi. This is on page 311, halfway down the page. He put, now the translator put in them, now we understand why he did it, around his head. He made them like a gutter pipe around his head, like a structure that would protect his head, because he was afraid of dangerous animals. Okay, so he made like a pile of stones in a kind of formation that would protect him. Now, let's try to figure this out, boys and girls. Would it protect him against a wolf? How tall was this gutter pipe? 6 feet? 10 feet? From some stones, right? Would it protect him against a snake? Well, what would it protect him against? So some of the explanations here say, your job is to do what you can. Because Baruch is running the world, and he determines the outcome. But you don't simply rely openly on a miracle, especially as someone like Jacob, who has the merit to rely on miracles. And if he asked for a miracle, he would have it. But you don't do that. You do what you can to handle the situation naturally. And then whatever happens, happens. And this is something which is not only something that's, how shall I say, a natural, human perspective, but you see that the Kodesh Baruch Hu does this also. Kodesh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu, at the end of his life, climb the mountain and you'll see the land of Israel. There is no mountain in the world from which a human being can see the whole land of Israel. There is no such thing. So it means he's going to have a vision. Well, he can have a vision in the valley also. Don't do that. No, I don't want you to do that. I want you to climb the mountain, because when you climb the mountain, every time you climb a mountain, you see further than you normally see. So the impact of seeing much further is much less than having a vision in a valley, where it's all divine, all supernatural. You put in an effort to reduce the scope of the miracle. Noah's asked to build an ark. There are various reasons for building the ark. God doesn't need an ark of wood to save people and animals. Thank you very much. He could have saved them in any way. And indeed, it was all supernatural because, as the Ramban points out, the ark is too small. You have to be a modern biologist and tell them about 30,000 species of beetles in order to prove that the ark was too small. The Ramban 800 years ago knew that. So, but why do the box? Because you did something, and so you're watching the animals go in. Now, if you're calculating the square feet that there are there on the second level, and there's this one takes up this, and this one takes up this, 462, 463. You're calculating, so you'll be able to see that it's taking in more than it could hold, but it doesn't make the impact on you as if they would all float in space. It reduces the impact of the miracle. This is a policy that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to engage in. So Yaakov Avinu says, I'm doing what I can do. There are stones here. I can make some kind of barrier, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take care of the outcome. That's one thing to learn from here, a piece of Musar. Now that we haven't explained why it says the stone later. So, Rashi brings a midrash. Yeah. The stones began to quarrel with one another. This one would say, upon me shall the righteous lay his head. This one would say, upon me shall he lay his head. The Holy One, blessed be, immediately made them into one stone. That's why it says he took the stone that he placed around using the singular the stone, which is correct. It became one stone. It was many stones and it became one stone. Okay? That's a midrash that every child at the age of 6 knows. There are Musa Sforim that ask the following question. I don't know, hear what you think of this question. How did HaKadosh Baruch Hu make the many stones into one? Here are 2 possibilities. He glued them together, one, or he ground all the stones into powder, and he made the powder into a single stone. When I first came across this question, I was probably around your age and around your state of Torah knowledge, and I was really irked by this. Who could possibly care? Why are you asking a question like this? What could you possibly learn from a question like this? It took me a while, but I realized there's something very deep going on here. What's going on here is, how do you unify different elements into a single thing? With glue, each thing remains what it is. This piece is sandstone, and this piece is granite, and this piece is shale, and this piece is a diamond, and so forth and so on. They retain their individual identities. They're just connected to one another. They function as one. Sandstone means you make everything homogeneous. Everything comes out to be exactly the same. Left side, top, bottom, right side, it's all homogeneously, the ingredients are mixed homogeneously, and it's all the same blend. Do you make a group, a single group out of disparate individuals by forcing them to be the same? Or can you take into account their individuality and enable them to work together being different? The Torah has many sources which indicate that the latter is the way in which we conceive of unity. If you take a comparison, I'm speaking from my background now, take 80 violins all playing the same note on the same string. If they're good, you'll hear just one note. That's real unity, right? Now take an orchestra, 80 people playing 25 different instruments, 20 different instruments, and they play in harmony. That's a much richer unity than everyone playing the same thing. So the answer in the Muslim story is because Baruch Hu used glue, so that the individuality of each stone remained intact, and yet they were formed into a single stone. Here you see something which, in physical terms, and in terms of the actual scenario of the story, would be an absolutely trivial, insignificant detail, not even worthy of mention. But a piece of deep philosophy can be encoded in it. Indeed, there's a Sforno that points out in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, the book begins with a census of the Jewish people. And later on, in the middle of the book, there's another census, which took place 40 years later. And the description of the census was quite different. In the beginning of Bamidbar, the census described as being done b'mispar shemos, by the number of names. And that phrase is missing from the second census. Now, if you think about it, the phrase mispar shemos embodies a philosophical contradiction. Because when you count up the number of items in a group, every item counts for one. No individuality is taken into account at all. How many people? Age doesn't matter, sex doesn't matter, strength doesn't matter, intelligence doesn't matter. No, nothing matters. Each one is a person. One. Shame? Everyone has a different name. So when you say b'mispar, you're obliterating individuality, and when you say name, you're emphasizing individuality. So what does it mean, mispar shemos? The answer is you have to make a number out of them, but using their individuality, not obliterating the individuality. That's how you're supposed to unify them. The second census, 40 years later, didn't have that. It says this for they weren't able to do it. After the sin of the spies, they weren't able to do it anymore. Had they gone in with the first count, the unity would have expressed a certain measure of godliness, where the conquest of the land of Israel would have been bloodless. They would have seen us and run. They would have seen God's name on you, and they would have run for their lives. And as it was, 40 years later, where they couldn't integrate that way, there were battles, and some Jews were killed in some of the battles, and it was a different experience altogether. So this idea of unifying, taking into account the individuality of each person is a core Jewish idea. There are many, many sources for it. And that's what the Bali Musa are expressing over here by how the rocks were unified, which otherwise you would think of as a trivial remark. Questions? Yeah.
So, could also another question be, since we were initially talking about pretty much miracles, like pretty much scaling from like how like miraculous they are to like mundane. Could also another question would that be which one is more miraculous, them just fusing together or just getting ground to dust and coming together?
Which one is more miraculous?
I mean, they both sound like pretty unlikely, but like, would that be like a question within that, perhaps?
Let's think about that for a second. I'm feeling inner intuitive resistance. I mean, when you have an infinity of power, the fact that you use 5 megawatts or 100 megawatts against infinity is both zeros, so it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. Right? Vis-a-vis Kodesh Baruch Hu is not bigger. But you can have miracles that make a different impression on a person. Yeah. The way in which they're done can make a different impression. We talked about the plagues in Egypt. They fell into 2 different categories, and the impact that they had on the observers. So that you could have. But bigger and smaller, I don't think, doesn't strike me that you're going to have that. And certainly not here where it's just a physical process. Yeah.
So I still had the same question from before.
On these verses? Well, I mean,
Alright.
well, hold on. Well, we'll get there. We'll get there, yeah.
Did the rocks represent something in particular? Like, do they
I'm sorry, say it again?
Did the rocks represent something in particular? Do they have like a certain correlation to, or they just represent the concept that you should keep your individuality? Do they have like a certain?
It's not only that what you should do, but people who are organizing groups should keep in mind that the individuality of the person should be utilized. It used to be famous, and I think the American Army has improved. It used to be famous that they would take an accountant and have him drive a jeep. And they would take a guy who was a football player and have him signing papers. They just assign people to jobs willy-nilly, without you lose so much talent that way. Right? Okay. Fine. So 12. And he dreamt. And behold, a ladder was set earthward, and its top reached heavenward. And behold, agents of God, I would have written, because angels, the way it's used in English to say of God is redundant. Angels are only of God. And the word in Hebrew means an agent, someone who acts on someone's behalf. Agents of God ascending and descending on it. Now, before we look at the rest of it and the Rashi, I just want to point out something. Keep going. The beginning of verse 13 is, and behold. And skip to the next page. The beginning of verse 15 is, behold. And I think that screams for some kind of attempt. You have 4 verses, and it says, behold, 4 times. Behold means something like, pay attention. Okay, I'm paying attention. You have to say it 4 times in 4 verses? In the first verse, it says it twice. So, at the very least, behold means what I'm going to tell you now has its own meaning, its own significance. It has its own message. It's not just backdrop for later things, and the message will be accumulation of all the details. No. For each behold, you have to say to yourself, if the text stopped after this phrase, I would be able to tell a story about what it meant. And that's a challenge to the interpreter. You look at what's coming in this particular piece of text and say, well, that's just backdrop to make this work, and the message is really over there. No, you can't do it. It can be backdrop also, but it's got to communicate something of its own. If you're told behold, then something to see where that behold is. So now in the verse we just read, 12, you have 2. Behold, a ladder was set earthward, and its top reached heavenward, and behold, agents of God were ascending and descending on it. That's one thing. Now, I want to tell you something on the first, then we'll look at Rashi on the second half of the verse. And the structure of the verse altogether. I'm going to tell you something, and you tell me whether it's justified in the verse or not. You see, it says the ladder was set earthward. Set earthward. Earthward means to the earth. Well, if it's set to the earth, then it's not coming from the earth. You can't be coming from and to at the same thing, at the same place at the same time. Now, in this verse, there are only 2 places mentioned, earth and heaven. So if it's said earthward, to the earth, it must be coming from heaven. And it carries a very profound message. The ladder links earth and heaven. How is the linkage set up? Who's responsible to make contact? Answer, the ladder comes down from heaven to earth. God sets up contact. You may respond to the contact, but God sets up the contact. Not like that famous picture of God on the cloud reaching his hand out, and man from the mountain reaching his hand out, and the fingers are just about to touch. No, it's not a joint affair. Making contact is from God to us. Full stop. That I'm saying. Now, do you tell me, look at the whole verse that we just read, all 8 words of it. and tell me whether you think it makes sense or doesn't make sense. Am I justified in saying that?
It says the angels of God were ascending and descending.
Yes. So what does that mean?
So if there should only be descending.
That is what Rashi's going to ask in the second half. When I get to the Rashi in the second half, it's coming from a slightly different place. We'll just take the first half. Could you think of an objection? You think of a critic who would say, "Oh, Rabbi, you're making it up. I'll prove it to you." Because there's a word in this 6 words, there's a word there that contradicts what you're saying.
What was your claim one more time again? You're saying that it's...
I'm saying the ladder came from heaven to earth. Because it said earthward. Earthward means to the earth. And I'm concluding from that the connection between heaven and earth is made by heaven reaching down to earth, not vice versa. Because it says earthward. What will the critic say?
Isn't this from Yosef's perspective?
The words. Which word in these 6 words is the critic going to cite and say to me, Rabbi, you're making a mistake?
Did they say the top reached heavenward?
Heavenward! Hey, Rabbi, you made a big deal out of earthward. 2 words later, it says heavenward, to the heavens. Excuse me. And you think it's a contradiction, then deal with the contradiction. Don't pretend you don't see the second word and make a big deal out of the first word. That's what the critic will say. But the critic is wrong, dead wrong. Now look carefully. It's only 8 words. Look carefully and see why the critic is wrong. See if you can figure out why the critic is wrong.
When it says it's set, I imagine you're talking about the bottom of the ladder, and then when it says the top reached heavenward, you're talking about the top of the ladder, so there isn't a contradiction.
Okay, number 1, you're not talking about the same things. I wouldn't say it exactly the way you said it, because the subject of the first one is, the thing that's earthward, the subject of earthward is? The ladder. The ladder as a whole. Whereas the subject of the second phrase is the top. That's 1. Okay, good. The subject is different. What else?
Ladders can't be up and down, like it's not really.
Of course they can.
Yeah.
Of course they can. You know what a rope ladder is?
The ones with the.
No, of course. What are you talking about? Ladders are up and down very often. Most times they're at a very high angle.
Like it could be the top, the bottom, or the bottom, the top. That's what I'm meaning. Like many ladders, it's just like.
I know what you. Ladders are most often almost vertical. They're used for climbing heights.
No, yes, I'm saying like the top could be the bottom because it's just a piece of.
Oh, okay. That's not bad. After all, Rosh could mean either end. It just means an end. But it's reaching heavenward.
Right.
Heaven above earth, last time I checked. Right? Okay. But now, so look, you have these 2 phrases. The critic says earthward, heavenward. You can't make a big deal out of earthward, it says heavenward. Answer. Look carefully at the phrase and you see they're not parallel. Okay. One lack of parallelism is the subject. In the first phrase, it's the ladder as a whole. And the second phrase, it's the end of the ladder. Okay? That's good. The subjects are different. Is there any other difference between the 2 phrases?
You know also the directions, but...
No. There are only 2 words left. Yeah. You got to answer my question now? Yeah.
One says mutzav, one says magia.
Right. What about the verbs? Not only are the subjects different, but the verbs are different. One is set and the other is reached. Yes? One is set and one is reached. So, the ladder was set earthwards. That's how it's put in place. Reached means, where's the other end? Those are 2 entirely different subjects. You know, when you come to a fork in the road and you ask a local, where does this road go? You don't mean the road is moving, do you? You don't think it's an escalator, you know, get out, you ride free. You mean, where's the other end? If I go down this road, where will I end up? Right? Where does it go to? That's how we talk, even though nothing's moving. So, the first phrase says it was set in place earthward. That's how it got to be where it is, in its position. Then the second question is, where's the other end? It's in position already. Now, where's the other end? The other end is in heaven. Right? So there's no contradiction at all. And the message that the connection between heaven and earth is made from heaven to earth has been established by this first half of this verse alone, and that's why it gets its own behold. If this text had stopped here, we would have learned something very important. Jacob would have had a very important dream. And by the way, I said this for many years, and then I found that Rosh Hashanah Hirsch says it. So, this is one of the places where you can deduce a meaning for a text. I think this is ironclad. You can't get out of this. Now, yeah.
For the next one, it says ascending before descending.
Right. So look at Rashi. Verse 12, on page 312. Setting and descending. Ascending first, and afterwards descending. Now, Rashi doesn't speak out the problem here. He takes it as obvious. What's the problem? So it says ascending first and descending afterwards. So what?
Normally, if you're coming from angels, I imagine they're in heaven, how they're going to be ascending first. If they're in heaven, they have to descend.
This sounds like a round trip. No, if their place of dwelling is in the heavens, it should have said descending and ascending. Right? So then it isn't a round trip. Aha. So it isn't a round trip, then what is it? Okay, and that motivates Rashi's explanation. This is a classical explanation. The angels who escorted him in the land of Israel do not go out of the land. They're unique to the land of Israel. They're the FBI angels. So they ascended to the sky. And after the angels of the area outside the land of Israel, that's the CIA angels, right, descended to escort him. There are two different groups of angels. The ones that work within the land of Israel and the ones that work outside the land of Israel. And what Jacob is seeing in his vision is a changing of the guard. Okay, now I want to make a logical remark and then give you some support for what I'm saying. The first half of the verse, with the ladder being set in place, I believe that the interpretation which I explained to you is deduced from the verse. I don't think you can budge from it. That doesn't mean, it couldn't mean more, it could mean an infinity of more, but this it means. It means that the connection between heaven and earth is made by heaven extending itself to earth, period. This business of ascending and descending, so Rashi gives an explanation which fits. It says something which is important to know, it's based on other sources, and it definitely fits. But that doesn't exclude the possibility there might be another explanation instead of Rashi's explanation, which also fits. Not in addition, but instead. So the two levels I call deduction and explanation. In the first half of the verse, you deduce a meaning. In the second case, you express a theory which explains what's written. But as anybody knows, the fact that you have an explanation doesn't mean it's right. There could be other possible explanations, and one of them is true, or none of them are true. Something else could be the truth. And if you say, but then, Rabbi, the second type of interpretation, which is only an explanation, is very loose, very weak. It might be mistaken or might tolerate contradiction. And you think, well, then, it's something which shouldn't be taken seriously. I will gently remind you that all of science is based on explanation, all of it. All the theories that explain our world are just there because they explain, and they could all be wrong. We still don't think that science is somehow trivial and insignificant and so forth and so on. No, having explanations is very important. So that's Rashi's proposed explanation. But I want to show you that his explanation fits other things which make it much more solid than you might have expected here. So take a look at the very end of Vayetze. On page 357, this is the beginning of chapter 32. Jacob's on his way back to the land of Israel. Verse 2. Jacob went on his way, and agents of God encountered him. Agents of God encountered him. Jacob said when he saw them, now watch this carefully, boys and girls, this is a godly camp. And he called the name of that place Machanoim. Now your helpful, friendly translator said, I don't want to confuse these people. I'll just transliterate it so they won't know what it means. Wasn't that nice of him? Machanoim in Hebrew means twin camps. Twin camps, plural. Now the reader is going to say, now wait a minute, Rabbi. Wow, what's going on here? He said this is a godly camp. One, singular. And he called the place twin camps? Why did he do that? Why did he do that? So if you look at Rashi, the very bottom of the page here on 357, Machanoim, this means two camps. Those angels outside the land of Israel who had come to be with him up to this point, and those of the land of Israel who came toward him. Remember what Rashi said about the latter. The Israeli angels are leaving him, and he sees the other ones who are coming to join him. He leaves the land of Israel with the externals. Now he's coming back. And what we see here is that a band of angels encountered him. That's in addition to the band of angels that's been traveling with him for 20 years. Another band of angels now encountered him. That makes two. That's why he calls the place twin camps. And it's twin because they're both camps of angels. Now those who want to say it means the angels and his human camp, you could say that, but it's not as exact as when you say it's twin camps. Now, one more piece of logic and one more piece of text. Here you have the two camps together. That's because the Israeli angels came to meet him while the externals were still with him. In our case, where the latter, we say he saw the angels ascending, those are the Israeli angels going up, and the replacements coming down. In both cases, the Israeli angels move first. Now, when he's coming back, because the Israeli angels move first, he has an overlap. So, when he's leaving and the Israeli angels move first, what are you going to have? No. No. No one sees it? What's the alternative to an overlap?
An opening.
A gap.
Yeah.
You're going to have a gap. Right? It's not obvious. If the Israeli angels move first, let's say when he's coming back, right? He's coming back with the externals, and the Israeli angels come to meet him, and because they move first, before the externals have left him, the Israeli angels come to meet him, there's two. Now when he's having the dream, he has his Israeli angels. He sees the Israeli angels leaving. They move first. They leave. And then the externals come to accompany him. So there's a gap. Right? Now look at what it says back where we are. It's on page 312. 13. And behold, Hashem was standing over him. 13. Hashem was standing over him. And look at Rashi. 13. Was standing over him to guard him. Because there's a gap in the angels. There are no angels there. So Hashem fills in during the gap. That's not bad, eh? The explanation works very nicely. It works here, it works over there, it works on verse 13 over here, it works very nicely. It's still only an explanation. Maimonides in the guide has a different explanation altogether. But it's an explanation that's rooted in the text and rooted in logic. That's an example of how these explanations work. Okay? Okay, so now, I think we got 2 minutes. One little thing. 13, Hashem was standing over it, and Hashem said, I am Hashem, God of Abraham, your father, and God of Isaac. Anybody want to wave the flag here? Yeah.
It seems odd he's saying Abraham your father, and then God of Isaac. Isaac is his father.
Yeah, it's a little strange, hey? I mean, now let's not exaggerate. In the word in Hebrew, Av can mean father, grandfather, great-grandfather to the nth degree, right? We call Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov's hundreds of generations before us, right? But in the same context, to use the word Av for the grandfather and not for the father is very peculiar. It's very peculiar. Yes, Hashem, next week we will talk about that. But Rashi has a different problem with this. Look at the Rashi now, at the bottom of 312. God of Isaac. Although we have not found in Scripture that the Holy One, blessed be He, would designate His name over the righteous during their lifetimes. Never is God called God of so-and-so when so-and-so is alive. By writing God of so-and-so. Why? Why don't we do that? Because there's a verse that says, behold, He does not trust in His holy ones. There, the context can either mean angels, it can even mean, or certainly human beings. He doesn't trust in them, and therefore, to designate that they already get sealed as their name being a name for the Creator, that wouldn't happen while it's still alive. So how come here you have the only exception? Why does it make this the only exception? Here he designated his name over Isaac because his eyes had dimmed, and since he couldn't see, he was confined to the house. And behold, it was as if he was dead. The amount of activity and responsibility that he could accomplish was very, very much limited. And the drive toward evil had ceased from him. In a sense, it means he didn't have effective free will because he had no drive left to do anything wrong. And that means he's equivalent of dead. And this is very, very important. Life means spiritual growth. That's what it means. Spiritual growth is based on free will effort. If you get to the point where you can't do and you can't exercise free will, then you're not living, you're not really alive. So since he's, so to speak, safe, nothing's going to deteriorate, God allowed his name to be used in connection with Isaac, but that's only because his spiritual life was really over. That's a very important idea, yeah.
Is it then, is his free will limited in the way that he can't do evil, or rather he just doesn't have free will together because he can't choose his actions?
Well, I think action I'm not sure that I can answer you in any short way. We understand action as a result of free will. In particular, free will is always a choice between good and evil. That's all. No other things that you do or decisions are considered to be free will. If you have no evil inclination, then you're not choosing between good and evil. If you're not choosing between good and evil, you're not really exercising free will. And then it's very hard to call what you're doing an action. Let's leave it at that. I think that's right. I'm skipping over certain subtleties, but that's basically right. Yeah.
Did he defeat his Yetzer Hara, or did he just have no? Did he defeat his Yetzer Hara, or did he just have no?
Did he defeat his Yetzer Hara?
Did he eliminate it?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. We have on record that, let's see, Yerushalmi, that Avraham annihilated King David annihilated his Yetzer Hara, and Avraham made his Yetzer Hara faithful to God by incorporating it in his service of God. And the higher resolution is Avraham's. Says King David couldn't do what Abraham did, so he did the second best by eliminating it. What happened in Rashi doesn't explain, so I don't know. Yeah.
So from we learned just yesterday that Esav was just waiting for the death of Yitzchak.
What was waiting for?
Esav was waiting for the death of his father.
Yeah, Esav, right? Yeah.
To get to Yaakov. I mean, I know we say he's not dead,
Yeah.
This makes you think like why Esav is not already going for Yaakov. I mean, I still see like the
No,
resolution that
no, he wouldn't appreciate that. He wouldn't think in those terms altogether.
because he's alive.
After all, what is it motivating Esav? He doesn't want his father to be in pain. Father will be in pain, right? Whether or not you have the freedom to choose between good and evil doesn't mean that you can't feel pain. Esav didn't want to cause pain to his father.